All across Europe, thousands of people lie dead or dying. In North Africa, both large cities and small villages overwhelmed with the dead. Everywhere, victims are being shunned by their own friends and families who fear they may be next.
There are more dead around here than there are living.
14 years after the first outbreak, the plague has returned, and many believe the world may not survive this time.
We live now in the last days. Who can doubt that the end of the world is at hand?
It's March 27, 1361, and this is Timeline. I'm Stephen Bell for Timeline. Much of the world tonight is battling an old foe far deadlier than any of the armies ever seen on this continent. The great pestilence, the plague, has broken out again, and still there's no cure. In Italy, France, and Spain, countless deaths are being blamed on the disease. Some cases have been reported in the German states, but so far England has been spared. The plague has devastated some small towns. In the French village of Menneguet, the dead now outnumber the living. 55 people have died there in the past 48 hours. In Siena, Italy, bodies have been lying uncollected in the streets for days. There are not enough carters left alive to bury them. And at the Pope's headquarters in Avignon, 200 people died yesterday. People want to know why, and neither the church nor the civil authorities can answer them. This new plague is certain to increase the social unrest fueled by the last outbreak just 14 years ago. We have a series of reports. First, Siboletto of Zimbabwe in France.
Here in the cathedral in Paris, priests and monks pray for God's mercy as the number of dead rises. No one really knows what to do. Many churchmen are leaving their posts, abandoning their congregations, thinking only to save themselves. And the people of Paris find themselves again facing the nightmare they thought was over almost a generation ago. With me now is Guy de Chauliac, surgeon to the royal family who himself caught and survived the pestilence in that first outbreak. Doctor, is it certain this is the same plague as before?
Signs are unmistakable. It starts with high fever, dark patches on the skin, black tumors on the neck, or in the armpits or groin. Patients with this type of plague have at least a small, very small chance of recovery. But when the plague comes into the lungs, there's no hope. As soon as the sick start coughing and spitting blood, death comes quickly. But not only for them, but for all those close by.
No one knows how or why the plague passes from person to person, or why some who nurse the sick are spared, while others die alongside their patients. But many doctors believe the best way of countering contagion is with sweet-smelling fires, or surrounding the sick with pungent smells.
How can smoke fight the will of God? He sent the pestilence as a punishment for man's mortal sins. But we didn't heed him. We continued our sinful ways. Now, his anger falls on us again, and this time, no one will escape his wrath.
Everything in the world is made up of the four elements: earth, fire, water, and air. This pestilence comes from the corruption of air. When the element air breaks down, it forms thick, sticky miasma. If such miasma comes into contact with people or animals, it upsets the balance of the body and can cause plague.
Is there any way to control the miasma?
Aromatic smoke can break up the corruption. So can some sounds. The ringing of bells, soft music, hymns. But there's too much of the bad air. One might as well use a cup to empty the ocean.
It's just a few weeks since the first reports came in of this new outbreak of plague. Every hour sees more people die, and it's feared it could soon exceed that of the last great pestilence 13 years ago. Doctors now seem as helpless to combat the disease as they were then. From plague-struck Paris, this is Siboletto of Zimbabwe reporting.
And just since Siboletto filed that report, we've learned that 1,400 people died today in Paris, thousands more in the rest of France. Things are no different in Italy. In one city, the plague has returned, bringing not only death, but also nightmares that most had forgotten. Louis de Jaen is in Siena.
In the first outbreak, over half this city's population, more than 30,000 people, died within 6 months. And then it left as suddenly as it had arrived. And the citizens of Siena, like most of Europe, put tragedy behind them. For many times were good. There were high wages because labor was so scarce, lower rents, a chance to improve their lot in an emptier world. The plague's return has changed all that.
To see these sights I never thought I'd see again, except in purgatory. The boils are agony. My brother died screaming. I've seen fathers abandon their children, husbands their wives. Last time, great pits were dug, since none could be found to bury the dead properly, out of love or even out of greed. No priest, no service, just toss them in and quickly cover up the pit.
Maybe God plans to finish us off this time. Who could blame him, seeing all the wickedness in the world? There's been no priest here for 12 years. Last one up and ran to the hills when the pestilence first came knocking at the door. He wasn't much of a man. More interested in stuffing his stomach than he was in saving souls. But he was a priest. They never sent us another. Rich bishops in fine palaces. They don't care for simple folk like us. How can the village survive? Folks get lazy. Why bother working when you could be dead tomorrow? No one's even bothered with the spring planting. It's easier to take what you need from the dead. I do what I can. And if God cares for common folk, then I reckon he won't mind if I say a prayer or two over the dead.
In this latest outbreak, people know only too well what to expect from the pestilence. For the past week, the streets have echoed with the rumble of wheels, the carts of the dead with their dreadful cargoes, and the wagons of the rich fleeing for open country, where they hope plague won't follow. Over and over again, I hear people say, why? Why is God so angry? How can it happen again?
But has anything changed from last time? Is anyone able to give any hope that things will improve?
Cities are setting up boards of health in response to the emergency. But few have confidence in priests or doctors. They were helpless before, they are helpless now.
Thank you, Louis. When we come back, a look at where this disease may have come from. History could give us the answer.
Witness a miracle in the making at Cordoba Brothers Papers. Our tireless devotion to the Eastern art of papermaking assures you an experience you will never forget. Far superior to parchment. It's smooth, it's white, it's paper.
It's not just a manuscript. It's a miracle.
Fine papers from Cordoba Brothers for words that will pass the test of time.
It's been 14 years now since that first outbreak of plague, and we appear to be no closer to solving many of the mysteries that surround it. Back then, ships plying the eastern trade routes are believed to have brought the disease to Europe. Plague followed the sailors relentlessly and struck every port. First Constantinople, then the rest of Byzantium. Then it headed west and began its devastation of Europe on the island of Sicily.
Genoese merchants were on board sick with black boils the size of hen's eggs. At first, we tried to care for them, but when our people began to show the same terrible swellings, we had no choice. We made them leave, but already it was too late. Now other towns shun us, as if we could pass on the disease with just a glance. May God have mercy on Messina.
There was no escape. People isolated victims or drove them out, but nothing stopped the disease. This time, Europe has had some advance warning. North Africa and Egypt have been fighting the plague all winter. But just like before, the best minds in the Muslim world have found no way to combat it. Selim Karasi in Cairo has a report.
The water wheels on the Nile are still, and no muezzin remains alive to call the faithful to prayer. The Sultan and his court fled last October as soon as the first deaths were reported. Ever since, the pestilence has spread rapidly. City authorities have tried to count the number of coffins passing through the gates. But as in the first outbreak, precise figures of how many have died are almost impossible to come by.
I buried my 2 sons with my own hands, and another boy who had no one left to grieve over him. And now, my father, too, goes to join the martyrs.
The plague that ravaged Cairo 12 years ago virtually wiped out the labor force. In recent years, many of the survivors in the countryside, lured by tales of high wages, migrated to the city. But today, once again, many of the streets are deserted. The Prophet said, one should not flee the plague, but only the most pious will stay behind when they see their leaders fleeing. No one will bring food to the city, even if there were customers to buy it. The only merchants making a profit are those selling magic cures, herbs and potions alleged to ward off the plague. For these, people will pay any price.
There is no cure. How can there be when plague comes direct from Allah?
There is a tradition of the Prophet that those who die of plague are honored with a special place in paradise, alongside those who are martyred in battle.
One place not deserted is the bathhouse. Muslims believe that if they are going to die, then it's best to face Allah clean and purified.
I advise those who can to flee. Mortality is worse in crowded cities. Plague travels from person to person, and no pious words will make it otherwise. But I don't take my own advice. Doctors must remain with the sick, even if there's little enough we can do to cure them. Massages, soothing music, fragrant steam, fruit juices, all these help keep the body calm and balanced. And if the body is calm, then the plague miasma may not destroy it.
How can miasma be the cause of plague when one house is spared, another not? One city depopulated, another left untouched. Evil spirits, jinns carried the plague, and their darts pierced those who are not protected.
My father carries such a magic amulet all through the last great pestilence, and he died peacefully of old age in his bed 2 years ago. The imams may not approve, but a man needs protection, whether the plague comes from miasma or the plague darts off the jinns.
It's hardly surprising that people are turning to folk remedies and magic, since even here at the heart of Islamic civilization, doctors and men of God have shown themselves as powerless against the plague as their less learned colleagues in Western Europe.
But the plague came back to Cairo almost 5 months before it hit Western Europe. Do experts see a similar pattern to the first outbreak?
Everyone has a different opinion. No doctor or scholar agrees with another, whether it be the nature of the plague or how to cure it. The honest ones admit that nobody knows.
20 years ago, it was said to have originated in the East, perhaps from as far away as China. There were then rumors of great calamities at the far end of the Mongol Empire. Earthquakes and floods, huge storms of fire and plague that left whole cities empty, like a great cloud driven by the wind of Allah across the world. It corrupted every country it passed.
In that last outbreak, half the population of Cairo died. It was the same in Damascus, Alexandria, in all the neighboring cities. Now with the plague's return, people are despairing. They ask why. If the plague is a mercy of God, why is it being visited on his people twice in a single generation?
Thank you, Selim. We've now seen the plague's impact on North Africa, Italy, and France, and it's obvious that doctors are losing the battle. Joining us now from the Hôtel Dia Hospital in Paris is the royal surgeon, Guy de Chauliac. Doctor, to put it bluntly, why can't you stop the plague?
To be equally blunt, only God knows how. And he has not yet chosen to reveal his holy will to us mortals. I pray he will do so soon. Classical theory says that if the body's humor are balanced, patients in good health. If they are out of balance, sickness results and treatment should be given according to the ancient text. But theory is not saving patients, especially the young. Our children are dying. I don't know why, but this time we are burying more children than before. And the old people, too, seem to be suffering much worse than in the last outbreak.
So, Doctor, what you're telling us is there's nothing you can do?
The place for some of us to change our thinking. Now I deal with the body as it is, not as the classic texts assume it to be. I treat by observation and examination, even surgery. And some of my patients, a few do recover.
But how soon before there's a cure? Doctor, thank you. So the medical world is still searching for answers. What about the church? We now rejoin Siboletto of Zimbabwe in Paris.
It has to be said, the church is not coping very well. It's not been able to provide the comfort and support people need. For all its authority, the church is made up of individuals, men and women who act like men and women everywhere, some with hope and courage, others with cowardice and despair.
As long as there are sick who need us, we cannot forsake them.
There wasn't a Pope holy priest left in the parish. They tucked up their skirts and ran as far and fast as their legs could carry them.
12 years ago, as today, the highest mortality was amongst those who stayed to tend to the sick.
We grant a special indulgence, free of charge, to all priests and doctors who stand fast and aid the sick. We grant absolution to all in Christendom who, having confessed and being contrite, die without receiving last rites. People of Avignon, do not leave your relatives unburied in the streets. Because of the lack of carters, we consecrate the Rhone River so that bodies may be sunk in it.
But 13 years ago, as the pestilence tightened its grip on Europe, many believed the church had failed them. They looked for more direct ways to prove to God that they repented the sins of the world. Throughout Germany, groups of penitents, calling themselves flagellantes, toured the towns and villages, preaching that plague would cease if they took on Christ's own suffering.
God was angry at human beings for their pride, ostentation, and blasphemy, for neglecting the Sabbath and the Friday fast, but most of all, for adultery and usury. So God decided to destroy the world with a terrible plague. His mind was made up. But then the Blessed Virgin and the angels fell at his feet and begged him to give us one last chance. That's why we're here today, to prove our innocence with blood.
The flagellants weren't alone in finding a common scapegoat. As plague struck north through Europe, those still unaffected looked desperately for anything that could be blamed for the divine wrath.
It is the Jews poisoning the wells, wanting to finish off what they started when they killed Jesus.
The Jews killed our Lord, and thank God's vengeance for letting them live among us. Kill them!
Kill them!
Kill the Jews! Kill them!
We spared the children young enough to be brought up as Christian. Then we set on fire these buildings. It's been happening all over. Basel, Mainz, Zurich, Strasbourg. With the Jews gone, see how quick the plague disappears.
Christians who blame the pestilence on the Jews have been seduced by that liar, the devil. The massacre of Jews is a horrible thing and will be met in future by excommunication. We offer the shelter of Avignon to any Jews who want it, and we urge all clergy to do the same.
This time there have been some scattered reports of anti-Jewish pogroms, but now most people know the pestilence is a scourge laid equally on all men.
And have there been any similar flagellant movements in the last few months?
Not really. A few may still survive in primitive villages, but I doubt if anyone takes them seriously. Their bloodletting didn't work. The plague still came, and the flagellants died along with everyone else.
Thank you, Siboletto. With much of Europe stricken by the plague, there is another question. Is there any place that's safe? We'll take you to one country that so far has been untouched by the disease when we come back.
It's a great big world if you don't know your way around. Don't you wish you had a travel book you could rely on? Travels by Sir John Mandeville. Travels for the Discriminating Traveller, first published in 1357 and never out of date.
In just a few minutes now, Pope Innocent will be making what's billed as an important statement about the pestilence, and we'll be carrying it live for you. Meanwhile, there's late word from Venice that 800 people have died there just since sunrise today. And another ominous note, in France, the city of Calais is now reporting its first cases of plague. Calais, of course, is just across the channel from England, which so far has escaped the plague, but this report could heighten fears that the disease will strike there next. Owen of Canarfon is near Maidstone in England. Owen?
Sebastian is the patron saint of plague. The wounds he suffered from the arrows of the Romans are seen to be similar to the marks of the pestilence. This was painted by an elderly monk 12 years ago at a time when plague killed the entire village. The monk was the last person here left alive, and after completing the painting, he too died. Since then, this tiny chapel has become a place of pilgrimage for local people who believe that St. Sebastian, or the relics of the old monk, can answer their prayers and help them attain salvation. Before the plague, this used to be in the middle of a prosperous estate. But so many people died, there were not enough peasants to cultivate the fields, which then reverted to open country. But local people here are luckier than most. They're able to eke out a living, serving pilgrims who call on their way to Thomas Becket's shrine in Canterbury. Pilgrimages have become very popular in the last few years. Pilgrims invoke saints, rather than priests, to intercede with God on their behalf, in their prayers for immortal salvation. Now, with another outbreak of plague possible, no doubt the pilgrims are asking God for deliverance from that as well.
I pray for the state of our poor world. Stand-up are far too lax nowadays. People don't know their place, wanting to be better than they were born. And the violence. Even the pilgrim routes aren't safe. It would never have happened back in the old king's time.
I've had to double the wages since the last pestilence. And still my serfs just walk off whenever it suits them. And land values, well, they've halved. I mean, all the estates have just been left abandoned. Still, maybe the saint will put in a good word.
By law, serfs are bound to their lord and his land. But with labour so short, there's little anyone can do to keep them. However, many of the peasants who flock to the crowded cities looking for the well-paid jobs everyone talks about have found that city life was very different from what they expected.
Nobles get a good laugh from the saying, kick a peasant and he'll bless you. Bless a peasant and he'll stab you in the back. They're not nice words to use about ordinary God-fearing men. We're as good as them any day.
I heard tell there's plague amongst the Frenchies.
Plague? Pah! My lady, they're hanged and catch the pestilence. Life's a trial that only wine can cure, and nothing purifies the blood like wine.
You're right, dear. Wine, music, and all the loving you can get. Nobody gets sick on that sort of life.
Wages, freeing yourself from serfdom, a holy pilgrimage to save your soul. These are the everyday concerns of people in England. But if plague does return here, as it has to other parts of Europe, then there is no guarantee that anything will remain the same. In the 12 years since the Great Pestilence, society has undergone major changes. In France, peasant anger has already boiled over. In a revolt that's come to be known as the Jacquerie, thousands went on a 3-week rampage of blood.
But could the same thing happen in England?
Certainly, yes, the same tensions exist here. And of course, with the threat of plague, there is no way of predicting what may happen.
Thank you, Owen. The Catholic Church has stayed relatively quiet throughout the crisis, but in Avignon, France, at this hour, Pope Innocent has just gone out on the steps of the cathedral to address the faithful.
As the threat of pestilence continues to hang over our city, we beseech all of you to cease all sinning and pray and repent hourly. We decree that all churches will hold a penitential matin service every day until the danger passes.
Our 3 reporters are standing by with us now. Siboletto, what's your reaction to the Pope's speech?
I'm afraid it's just more of the same. Pray, repent, sin no more. There's nothing in his speech that will calm the fears of the majority of his people. It will just serve to reinforce the belief that the Church is powerless to explain such divine displeasure.
In the Muslim religion, there is no such contradiction. With no priesthood to stand between men and God, there is no church to shoulder the blame.
There is so much anguish and despair. I've watched a mother throw her child out into the street at the first cough. I've seen another fearlessly cradling 2 dying children in her arms. This plague brings us out to the best and the worst in us.
And the best and the worst in society. Thank you, Louis. I do wish we could tell you otherwise, but it looks for certain now as if no part of Europe will escape the disease. From the English coast, we've just gotten word of plague deaths in the city of Bristol, the first such fatalities reported in England. This new report, of course, will only add to the despair felt by millions. Medical knowledge apparently useless, the strongest governments powerless, the faithful finding the church helpless to solve their plight. If society's best and brightest cannot stop this pestilence, then surely the social turmoil we've known since the last outbreak is going to get worse. For Timeline, on March 27, 1361, I'm Stephen Bell.
The plague, soon to be called the Black Death, would return generation after generation. Not until the 1800s did Europe's population ever get back to where it was before the plague. With church and civil authorities helpless, the Black Death made survivors question the rules under which they lived. These questions brought change. Peasant revolts spreading across Europe, the Protestant Reformation. Today, bubonic plague can be cured with antibiotics, but the world is never safe from epidemic disease. AIDS is a grim reminder of how new diseases can race through an unresistant population. Now, as through history, society is being changed and shaped by the diseases that afflict
it. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.